All right, let's take a journey, not just back in time, but to the very beginning of time as we know it, to a land of mud and myth nestled between two rivers. We're going to dive deep into the world of the Sumerians, the people who quite literally wrote the first chapter of our human story. Just try to picture this, a world where the silence of the desert holds the first words ever written down. This place existed long before the pyramids of Giza, way before ancient Rome, and even before the Greek gods on Mount Olympus. This was Sumer, a civilization built from raw earth bricks and shimmering canals, where they didn't just build cities, they basically invented the idea of civilization itself.
So for the Sumerians, how did it all begin? Well, their story of creation starts in absolute darkness and silence. Before there was a sky, before there was any land, before there was a single god to even name, there was just water, a vast primordial ocean, an endless sea of pure possibility.
And at the very heart of this idea is Namu. Now you gotta understand, she wasn't a creator goddess shaping the world with her hands. No, she was the source. Think of her as the great cosmic womb, and all of reality was just sleeping inside her, waiting to be dreamed into being.
So how do you get a world out of this cosmic ocean?
Well, the Sumerians pictured it as this grand, dramatic separation. First, the sky and the earth emerge from the water, but they're locked in this tight embrace. Then, their son, Enlil, who is the god of wind, of breath, he literally shoves them apart. And in that space he creates between them, that first breath of air, well, that's where everything else becomes possible.
Okay, so from that epic myth, let's jump into actual history. Around 4000 BC, something incredible starts happening in southern Mesopotamia. People begin to gather together in ways nobody had ever seen before. They start building the world's very first cities. And this wasn't just a new place to live, it was a total revolution in what it even meant to be human. And you have to understand, these weren't cities like we think of them today. Each one, places like Uruk, Eridu, was its own independent little world, a city-state. And here's the crucial part. The Sumerians believed their city didn't belong to them. Oh no, it belonged to a specific god. They were just the caretakers, the managers of a divine estate, which meant that for them, religion, politics, and your everyday life were all completely tangled together. So if your city is owned by a god, your divine landlord, you need a way to connect, right? You need a bridge between your world down here and their world up there. So right in the center of their sprawling mud brick cities, they built these colossal stepped towers that reached for the sky, a sacred man-made mountain. And this structure, the ziggurat, was so much more than just a temple. It was the absolute heart of the city, a true multi-purpose marvel. Up at the top, yeah, it was a sacred space, a stairway to heaven for the priests. But at its base, it was the city's economic engine, a central bank, a grain silo, a warehouse. And from its highest point, priests would track the stars, creating calendars and figuring out the seasons. It was this perfect fusion of the sacred and the super practical. Okay, let's just imagine for a second that you're the high priest. You're in charge of this whole divine operation. You have to keep track of thousands of bushels of grain coming in, huge herds of cattle, payments to the temple. Your memory alone is not going to cut it. You have a massive logistical problem on your hands. So what do? You invent a solution. The world's first writing wasn't for poetry or love letters, it was for accounting. The Sumerians started with these simple pictures called pictographs. So a little drawing of a stalk of barley meant barley. A drawing of an ox's head meant ox. It was direct, it was simple, and it was absolutely revolutionary. But you know, drawing a little picture for every single thing, that gets old fast, right? As their society got more complex, so did their writing. They developed this incredible script called cuneiform, made of wedge-shaped marks pressed into wet clay with a reed. And now a symbol could represent a sound, not just an object. This was the huge leap from just drawing things to actually writing down ideas. And this is the part that just gives me chills. Because what started as a tool for, basic bookkeeping, it just exploded. Writing went way beyond accounting. The Sumerians started using it to write down the first law codes, epic poems like the incredible Epic of Gilgamesh, sacred songs to their gods, and even scientific observations. They weren't just counting grain anymore. They were recording their entire universe. Now, this whole civilization didn't just pop up overnight. It grew and it changed over nearly 2,000 years. Think about that. It kicked off with those first cities in the Uruk period, then it saw powerful kings emerge in the proto-dynastic era. It was home to the world's very first empire under the Akkadians, and it even had this amazing cultural rebirth called the Sumerian Renaissance. And as things evolved, something really important started to shift. At first, all the power came from the temple, the house of the god. But over time, a new center of power propped up, the palace. This was the home of a secular king, a guy whose authority came from his army and his ability to run things, not just because a god said so. So now you had the priest and the king governing side by side.
So what happens when you get a bunch of powerful kings, each ruling their own powerful city-state? Yep, you guessed it, conflict. War became a regular part of Sumerian life. They fought over land, over resources, and, most importantly, over the control of the precious irrigation canals that were the absolute lifeblood of their world.
And we know this wasn't just some minor squabbling because we have the receipts. There's this artifact called the Stele of the Vultures, and it's one of the first war monuments in all of human history. It's this terrifyingly graphic carving that shows the king of a city called Lagash leading his soldiers, literally trampling over the dead bodies of their enemies from the city of Umma. It's a chilling reminder that the dawn of civilization was also the dawn of organized war. So what happened to them? Well, after thousands of years of innovation and war, the Sumerian civilization just faded away. They weren't wiped out in some single cataclysmic event. They were gradually absorbed by new groups of people, like the Akkadians and the Babylonians. Their language stopped being spoken, and their great cities crumbled back into dust. But, and this is the absolute key to their whole story, while the Sumerians themselves vanished, their ideas were here to stay. In fact, their ideas became the foundation, the bedrock, that much of our modern world is built on. In so many ways, we are all the cultural descendants of Sumer. Think about the number 60 for a second. Why are there 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour? That comes from the Sumerians. They used a base 60 math system. Every single time you look at a clock or measure a circle in 360 degrees, you are literally using Sumerian math. Their system is with us every single day. And honestly, the list of their firsts is just mind-blowing. They gave us the wheel, the plow. They gave us the first written laws, the first great piece of literature in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the 360-degree circle we just talked about, and the 12-month calendar. So much of what we just think of as fundamental to how the world works, it started right there, in the land between the rivers. So, you see, the Sumerians laid the foundation. They invented cities, writing, law, literature. They wrote the very first chapter of the human story, a story of gods and kings, of war and incredible creativity. And it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? 5,000 years from now, when someone looks back at our civilization, what will our chapter be about? What will the last chapter say about us?
History isn't dust, it's a journey through time. Here on History LM, we tell it simply and fast. If you love discovering the past in just a few minutes, hit like and follow History LM. Your next journey through time is waiting.